She was fired for whispering a prayer. But the truth was caught on camera. In a hospital where silence was safer than truth, one nurse made a choice that cost her everything. But when a hidden camera reveals what really happened in that patient's final moments, a cover-up unravels, and the world takes notice. Witness a powerful story of quiet faith, buried secrets, and the fight to be heard. This isn't just a story. It's a reckoning. The fluorescent lights of Mercy Hills Medical Center never dimmed, no matter the hour. For Elena Reyes, a soft-spoken nurse in her early 40s, they cast a kind of constant glare on the lives slipping in and out of the ICU. For 15 years, she'd served with quiet diligence, never raising her voice, never turning away a patient. But none of that seemed to matter now. The moment that would upend her entire life came at 2. Elena had just finished checking vitals when she noticed room 306 heart monitor flickering irregularly. She stepped inside. Mr. Harlan Green, age 76, ex-military, in for late-stage liver failure, was pale and shivering. His oxygen was dropping. She leaned in gently. "Miss Green, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, glassy and full of something close to panic. His lips moved. Elena leaned closer. "What is it?" "Please," he rasped. I don't want to die alone." "You're not alone," she assured him, squeezing his hand. He clutched her fingers with surprising strength. "Will you pray with me?" Elena hesitated for just a second. She knew the rules. Hospital policy forbade any staff-initiated religious interaction with patients. But he had asked, and something in his eyes told her this wasn't just a spiritual gesture. It was a plea. "Yes," she whispered. She bowed her head, placed a hand on his and quietly began. "Heavenly Father." Tears streamed down Mr. Green's face as Elena prayed over him. The words came naturally, not performative, not showy, just a simple request for peace, for mercy, for a soul to be received with dignity. Moments later, the monitor went flat. Elena stood in silence as the alarm rang out. She pressed the call button. Code blue. Doctors rushed in, followed by orderlies. CPR began. The paddles came out. But inside, Elena already knew. He was gone. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching. 2 days later, she was called into. "We received a report from another nurse," said Director Miles Harcourt, flanked by 2 administrators, "that you engaged in religious activity with a patient without consent." Elena blinked. "But he asked me to pray with him. There is no written consent. That puts the hospital at legal risk. It's strictly prohibited. I didn't force anything. He was dying. He was afraid." Harcourt didn't blink. "Unfortunately, that's not how the complaint was documented. We've reviewed the surveillance audio." "Audio?" Elena interrupted. "There are sensors in the ICU for safety reasons. They recorded part of your interaction." Her stomach dropped. "Did they record him asking me?" Harcourt closed the folder in front of him. "That's not clear. But the action violates policy regard." Then came the words that hit like a truck. "You're being placed on immediate administrative leave, pending formal investigation." A week later, she was fired. The news spread fast. Nurse fired for forcing prayer on dying patient. The local paper picked it up. Social media did worse. Strangers called her a fanatic. Her quiet world became a storm she couldn't outrun. The irony was bitter. 15 years of kindness erased in one moment of compassion. What no one knew, not the administration, not the nurse who reported her, not even Elena herself, was that something else had been recorded, and someone else had been listening. The staff break room at Mercy Hills was rarely quiet. But for Daniel Mendez, the overnight janitor, silence was routine. He liked it that way. Most people forgot he was even there. An invisible man with keys to every room and a mop that knew more secrets than it should. But Daniel saw more than people thought. And he remembered. He remembered Elena Reyes. She was always kind to him, always said thank you when he emptied her trash, always greeted him by name when most didn't bother. She even left him a thermos of hot coffee once, when he was working through a snowstorm. The kind of small kindness that sticks. So when he heard she'd been fired for praying with a patient, something in his gut twisted. Fired for what? He muttered to himself, pushing his cart down the East ICU hallway. He paused outside room 3006. He remembered that night. Not just because the alarms had gone off, but because he'd been inside that room early. What the hospital administrators didn't know was that Daniel had been installing new security sensor panels just 2 days before Mr. Green passed. The IT team was short-handed, and they'd doped him in to help mount the new devices and run power cable. And what Daniel didn't know at the time was that one of the tiny Wi-Fi-enabled test cameras he'd helped wire, installed temporarily for sensor testing, was still running. His job was to remove it the next morning. But then Mr. Green died. Chaos ensued. The camera had been forgotten. Until now. Daniel rushed to the utility room where he stored his gear. In the back, tucked into an old laptop bag, was the testing monitor they'd used to sync the camera feeds. He booted it up, heart pounding. There it was, timestamped. He fast-forwarded through the early evening, scrubbed through the soundless recording, then froze. There was Nurse Reyes entering the room. He turned up the volume. The software was low-grade, so the audio came through scratchy. But it was enough. Please, the old man's voice rasped. I don't want to die alone. Will you pray with me? He said. Daniel sat frozen. He watched the scene play out, the prayer, the soft-spoken words, the peace in Mr. Green's expression as he passed. And then silence. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. He had a choice to make. He could delete the file, like the hospital would probably want him to. Or he could do something. But who would believe a janitor? He wasn't close with the nurses. The administration barely knew his name. If he came forward, he could lose his job too. Then he thought of Elena, of her kindness, of how she'd been tossed aside like trash, for doing exactly what the patient had begged her to do. He stood up. He grabbed the laptop. That night, Daniel did something he'd never done before. He drove straight to the small church on Westbury and 5th, where the light was still on. Inside, Pastor Jordan listened quietly, as Daniel explained everything. Then he showed him the video. Pastor Jordan watched in silence, his hands folded, eyes steady. When it ended, he turned to Daniel. We need to help her. I thought so, Daniel said quietly. Do you trust me? The pastor asked. Daniel nodded. Pastor Jordan placed a hand on the janitor's shoulder. Then let's make this right. The truth deserves light. By the next morning, Pastor Jordan had already contacted a local attorney, one known for taking on powerful institutions when they'd done wrong, a woman named Nadine Clark. And she didn't waste time. Within hours, the video had been duplicated, verified, and stored securely, and Elena Reyes, still reeling from her sudden dismissal and public humiliation, was about to receive a knock at her door that would change everything. Elena Reyes sat on her apartment couch, still in the same scrubs she'd worn the day she was fired. It had been 4 days, but she hadn't had the strength to wash them, or herself, or anything really. She wasn't angry anymore. Not confused either. She was numb. The board had told her it was about inappropriate religious conduct, a violation of hospital policy. No hearing, no due process. Just a termination letter, and security escorting her out the back door. No one had defended her. No one had even looked her in the eye. A sharp knock at her door broke the silence. She hesitated. Another reporter. She'd already declined 3 interviews, not wanting to drag her name deeper through the mud. But when she opened the door, the woman standing there wasn't holding a microphone. "Elena Reyes?" the woman asked gently. "I'm Nadine Clark. I'm an attorney. May I come in?" Elena blinked. "Why?" "I think someone just gave you your life back." Inside, Nadine wasted no time. She pulled out a tablet, opened a file and hit play. Elena's knees buckled before the video even ended. She dropped into the nearest chair, hand over her mouth. That's from Mr. Green's room." Nadine nodded. "It's real. The janitor, Daniel Mendez, saved the file. It proves everything, that he asked you to pray, that you never forced anything, that you were doing what a dying man asked you to do." Elena's eyes filled with tears. But why would they lie? Nadine hesitated. Because it was never about the prayer. Elena looked up, confused. Nadine reached into her briefcase and pulled out another file. "This was sent to me by Pastor Jordan. It's a copy of a formal complaint Mr. Green filed 3 weeks before he died." She laid out the papers on the table. Elena leaned in to read. Her eyes scanned the lines, each word cutting deeper than the last. Subject: unsafe dosage practices and record manipulation at Mercy Hill's cardiac wing. Filed by Harold Green, retired pharmaceutical safety officer. Summary: observed irregularities in patient records. Suspects pressure from administration to alter dosages due to funding concern. Warns of legal consequences if not addressed. The air in the room grew still. "He was a whistleblower," Nadine said quietly. "A former federal compliance auditor. He came to Mercy Hills after heart complications. While he was there, he noticed something, and he tried to report it." Elena stared at the papers, heart pounding. "So, you think they used me? Used the prayer to silence me and cover up his complaint?" Nadine nodded. "You were the perfect scapegoat. You prayed. That was all they needed. They knew no one would question a quiet nurse with a soft heart. They knew you'd walk away quietly." "But the video," Elena whispered. "The video changes everything." Nadine confirmed. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Nadine leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "We need to go public, Elena. You were wronged." He was silenced. "This isn't just about your job anymore. It's about the truth." Elena hesitated. Her body trembled, her voice barely audible. "What if they attack me again? What if it gets worse?" Nadine didn't flinch. "Then we fight. Together." Just then, Elena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You don't know what you're playing with. Drop it, nurse." Her breath caught in her throat. She showed the screen to Nadine. Nadine's eyes narrowed. "They're scared. That means we're close." Elena looked at her. Really looked and finally nodded. "I'm ready." That night, Nadine made the first call to a journalist she trusted, a seasoned health correspondent named Carla Yates. And within 24 hours a headline lit up the internet. "Nurse fired for prayer. Hidden footage reveals hospital's deeper scandal." The video clip was embedded at the top. It spread like wildfire. Mercy Hills had a storm coming, and this time, it wouldn't be hidden behind closed doors. By mid-morning, Mercy Hills Hospital was surrounded by flashing cameras, protesters holding signs, and reporters yelling questions into microphones. Why was Nurse Reyes fired without an investigation? What happened to the patient who requested prayer? Is Mercy Hills covering up a medical scandal? Inside the hospital boardroom, the air was thick with panic. Legal counsel, PR heads, and hospital executives huddled behind closed doors, scrambling to prepare a statement. But the damage had already been done. The video was real, the voice was unmistakable. The transcript was damning. "Will you pray with me?" "Of course. I'm here. Tell them." Don't let them bury this. Promise me. It wasn't just a prayer. It was a confession. A plea. And the whole world had heard it. Otazamotid stood outside the hospital gates, flanked by Nadine and Carla Yates, the reporter who'd broken the story. Reporters surged toward her, but Carla raised a hand. "We ask for a moment," she said firmly. Then she turned to Elena. "You don't have to speak, but if you want to say something, now's your moment." Elena's fingers trembled, but she nodded. She stepped forward to the podium that had been set up, her hair pulled back, eyes tired but determined. "My name is Elena Reyes. I'm a nurse. I have been for 13 years. I was fired from Mercy Hills Hospital for praying with a dying man." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "What they didn't tell you," Elena continued, "was that he asked me to, not once, not twice. He begged, and he made me promise to tell someone what he'd seen inside this hospital. Because what he found was dangerous. And they knew it." She paused, voice steady now. "I kept that promise." The crowd erupted in applause. But the moment was about more than public support. It was about momentum, about shifting the story. That afternoon, multiple former employees of Mercy Hills began coming forward, quietly at first, through anonymous tips, then publicly. One former night nurse emailed Carla with screenshots of altered medication records. A pharmacy technician released logs showing suppressed inventory flags, missing dosage reports. And then a janitor named Daniel Mendez agreed to go on camera. He sat across from Carla, eyes shadowed but resolute. "I saw things," he said. "They cut corners to save money. Patients were getting wrong doses. Staff were told not to ask questions. When Mr. Green started poking around, people panicked. When Nurse Reyes prayed with him, they saw an opportunity. They didn't just fire her to protect the hospital. They silenced her to bury her." The interview aired nationwide. Within hours, the governor's office issued a statement. The Department of Health launched an official inquiry. The hospital's board chair resigned. 2 high-level executives were placed on administrative leave, and Elena, the nurse they tried to erase, became the face of a growing movement: care over policy, people over profit. Honor profit. Honor profit. Honor profit. That night, Elena returned to her apartment to find a letter slid under her door. No return address, no signature. Inside was a note, handwritten on lined paper. "You were his angel. Thank you for giving him peace. He was my father." DG tears welled up in her eyes. She clutched the paper to her chest. It wasn't over. There were still hearings to attend, more truth to bring to light. But in that moment, something inside her finally exhaled. She'd kept her promise. She hadn't just stood by a dying man's side. She'd stood up for his truth, and for her own. 3 weeks after the footage aired and the investigation was launched, Mercy Hills Hospital held a press conference, this time without the polished smiles or practiced spin. Elena Reyes wasn't in attendance. She didn't need to be. Her presence had already been felt far beyond the hospital walls. At a nearby auditorium filled with nursing students, Elena stood behind a wooden lectern, invited to speak not as an ex-employee, but as a symbol. Her hands were no longer shaking. Her voice didn't waver. "There will be days," she said, "when doing the right thing costs you everything. But if you choose to protect truth, compassion, and dignity, you won't regret it. Because silence never saves anyone." In the front row sat Daniel Mendez, the janitor whose quiet courage had opened the floodgate. Carla Yates, who had faced pressure from her own network to delay the story, had her recorder running again. Behind Elena stood a photo of Mr. Walter Green, projected on the screen. Dignified. Thin from illness, but with eyes that still held purpose. That's how Elena wanted him remembered. not as the man who died alone in a hospital room, but as the man who whispered truth when no one else would. With the weight of public opinion and growing piles of testimony, the Department of Health filed charges against Mercy Hill's former executive director and 2 senior managers for gross negligence and records falsification. But what shocked the public most wasn't the corporate malpractice. It was how routine it had become. Elena's quiet act of prayer had torn open something much bigger. Hospitals across the state began conducting internal audits. Medical boards opened up hotlines for anonymous reports, but one case would remain at the center of it all. Nurse Reyes vs. Mercy Hills. The board had quietly offered Elena a settlement, along with an apology written in the blandest corporate language. She declined both. Months later, Elena walked through the brand new wing of St. Matthew's Community Clinic, a grassroots medical center that opened downtown funded by donations, advocacy groups, and a quiet grant from a patient's family foundation. Above the front entrance, etched in bronze, "Let truth be your oath, let kindness be your cure." She didn't want her name on the building. Instead, she dedicated the chapel room to Mr. Green. Inside that small sunlit space was a bench. On it a plaque read, "For the man who asked for prayer and gave the world a warning." When they told me you were working here, I knew I wanted to be part of this. Elena smiled, humbled. She'd never wanted attention, never wanted to be a hero. But what she had wanted, what she still fought for, was simple: that no patient would ever die feeling unseen again. Nawam was in this hospital. She'd always told me to follow my heart, no matter the cost. "They're naming a scholarship after you," he said softly, "for nursing students, ones who speak up." Elena shook her head, a faint smile forming. "It was never about me." Daniel nodded. "I know. But you made them listen." They sat in silence for a while. 2 ordinary people, who had simply refused to look away when it would have been easier to stay quiet. The world kept turning. The hospital system, though scarred, began to change. Slowly, unevenly, but meaningfully. And while new battles would come, and other names would rise and fall in headlines, one thing remained true. A quiet nurse had reminded the world that compassion isn't a liability. That faith, when rooted in love, can heal more than wounds. It can expose what's been buried. And that sometimes the smallest voices, those whispered prayers, those final promises, can carry farther than any roar. What is lesson of this story? 1. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet whisper in the dark, doing what's right even when no one's watching, even when it costs you everything. 2. Truth has a way of rising. No matter how powerful the institution, the smallest act of integrity can ignite change and bring justice. 3. Kindness is not weakness. In a world that often rewards silence and compliance, compassion can be the most radical and transformative act of all. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any interesting stories.